On October 5, 1944, over the skies near Asselt, Netherlands, 5 pilots from number 401 Squadron of the Royal Canadian Air Force circled at altitude, their Spitfire Mach 9s shimmering in the soft afternoon light. Squadron leader Smith was the first to notice it, a glint of silver cutting through the sky toward Nijmegen at a speed that seemed almost impossible. There was no spinning propeller, no familiar outline, just a metallic spear darting through the air faster than anything the Canadians had ever faced. It was the Messerschmitt Me 262, a jet fighter, its twin engines leaving faint wisps across the purple horizon as it banked hard. For years, Allied briefings had spoken in hushed tones of German jet experiments, but now, the rumor had taken terrifying form. A machine roaring past at more than 500 miles per hour. Smith immediately radioed Flight Lieutenant Davenport, Flight Lieutenant Everard, Flying Officer Mai, and Flying Officer Sinclair, ordering them into attack formation. What followed became aviation history's first confirmed destruction of a jet fighter in air-to-air combat. Yet more than a milestone, it marked the first fracture in what Nazi propaganda had called an invincible wonder weapon. The Me 262 Schwalbe had just revealed its greatest weakness. Within months, American P-51 Mustang pilots would exploit that flaw relentlessly, turning the Luftwaffe's revolutionary creation into a liability, a marvel of technology outpaced by Allied strategy. Psychological shock of that first encounter spread like wildfire through Allied air bases across Europe. Pilots who saw the German jets understood instantly the age of propeller-driven dominance was ending. Among them was Captain Chuck Yeager of the 357th Fighter Group, stationed at RAF Leiston. Each intelligence report deepened his unease. The Me 262 could cruise at 540 miles per hour, while the best the Mustang could manage was 437. In a straight pursuit, the German jet was untouchable. The math was cold and cruel. If the Luftwaffe could field these jets in meaningful numbers with enough fuel and trained pilots, the Allied bombing campaign that was strangling German industry might suddenly collapse. Lumbering B-17 flying fortresses, crawling through flak-filled skies at 180 mph, would become helpless prey, attacked from any direction by jets too fast to intercept. For the first time since gaining control of the European skies, the Allies faced a chilling thought. They might lose it. But the Me 262's brilliance hid deep flaws. Born from the infancy of jet propulsion in 1944, its Junkers Jumo 004 axial flow turbojet engines were a breathtaking leap in engineering and a nightmare in reliability. Each engine produced around 1,280 pounds of thrust at 8,700 RPM, burning synthetic J2 fuel derived from brown coal at roughly double the rate of conventional piston engines. Germany's shortage of vital metals like nickel and chromium forced engineers to use chromadur alloy for the turbine blades, which couldn't withstand the heat for long. After just 10 hours of flying, the engines needed a full overhaul, and after 25 hours, they had to be replaced completely. In practical terms, that meant a jet could only survive 3 or 4 combat missions before requiring new engines. For ground crews already overwhelmed by fuel shortages and bombing raids, it was an impossible burden. Even when operational, the engines were fragile. The Me 262's throttle response lagged dangerously. Unlike piston engines that reacted instantly, the Jumo 04 took several seconds to adjust to power changes. Push the throttle too fast, and the engine would surge, temperatures spiking so high that turbine blades could melt. Pilots had to coax the throttle gently, inching it forward, waiting for the engines to stabilize. A fatal hesitation in the chaos of aerial combat. In a dogfight, seconds decided life or death. Then came takeoff and landing, the jet's most perilous moments. With a wing loading of nearly 300 kilograms per square meter, The Me-262 demanded higher speeds than any other fighter of the war, over 110 miles per hour, just to lift off, and nearly the same to land. When the brakes released, the aircraft needed almost half a minute to build enough speed for flight. During that time, it rolled helplessly down the runway, straight, predictable, and utterly defenseless. Any Allied fighter that caught a Me-262 on takeoff had a perfect target. Unable to maneuver, too slow to climb, too fragile to fight back. Landing was no better. The jet had to approach in long, steady descents, engines throttled carefully, airspeed fixed, a sitting duck for Mustangs lying in wait near German airfields. The Luftwaffe had built the future of flight. But it arrived too soon, in a war already decided by endurance, not innovation. As Me-262 pilots descended toward their airfields, fuel gauges near empty after missions lasting 60 to 90 minutes, they faced a perilous phase. Slowing for landing, lowering flaps, and extending landing gear turned them into predictable targets, flying straight and level. The very jet engines that made the aircraft nearly untouchable at high altitude became liabilities in these low-speed moments. Allied intelligence at 8th Air Force Headquarters in England studied the problem meticulously through the late summer and early fall of 1944 photo. Reconnaissance missions pinpointed jet bases at Achlem, Hepe, Rheine, Lechfeld, and Munich-Rhein. Analysis of gun camera footage from early encounters revealed both the aircraft's breathtaking speed and its dangerous slow flight vulnerabilities. Intelligence officers realized a critical fact. Me-262s had to return to these specific airfields. They couldn't divert because the jet engines required special J2 fuel, available only at designated facilities. This constraint created a tactical opening. If Allied Mustangs loitered near these bases, they could ambush jets at their most exposed moments. The tactic demanded patience, extended fuel endurance, and pilots willing to fly directly into heavily defended German airspace. Yet it offered the only reliable chance for propeller-driven fighters to engage jets on roughly equal footing. The Luftwaffe understood this vulnerability immediately after the first losses. Commanders built flak corridors along approach paths to jet bases, deploying 80-meter guns, 37-meter automatics, and quad 20-meter cannons, creating lethal curtains of fire. Advanced piston-engine fighters, including the Focke-Wulf FW-190D and rare TA-152Hs, were assigned top cover during jet takeoffs and landings. Flight schedules were randomized where possible to confuse Allied observers, and decoy aircraft were occasionally used to lure attackers into flak traps. Even barns near bases were converted into emergency landing strips, camouflaged with hidden parking areas in nearby woods. Despite these defenses, one fact remained inescapable. Me-262s had to take off and land, and during those moments, they were vulnerable. No amount of guns or camouflage could eliminate that weakness. Lieutenant Urban Drew of the 361st Fighter Group became intimately familiar with this reality. The 21-year-old from Detroit had previously encountered a Me-262 on a sortie and filed detailed intelligence reports describing its strengths and flaws. On October 7th, Drew was temporarily grounded and facing disciplinary action for an unauthorized victory roll after a successful mission. That punishment vanished when intelligence reported a concentration of Me-262s at Ahlem Airfield in northwestern Germany. Drew's prior experience made him the obvious choice to lead the strike. He briefed his flight meticulously, stressing that surprise, aggression, and a willingness to fly through German flak were essential. His wingman, Second Lieutenant Robert McCandless, would stay with him no matter what. Drew's P-51 Mustang, coded E2D and nicknamed Detroit Miss, lifted off from RAF Little Walden with full internal and wing tanks, giving nearly 4 hours of endurance. The afternoon sky over Germany was dotted with broken clouds but offered excellent visibility, ideal for spotting aircraft against the terrain. At 15,000 feet, Drew scanned constantly for contrails or the flash of sun on polished aluminum. As they neared the base, he spotted two Me-262s on the runway, engines running and preparing for takeoff. Drew pushed the throttle forward and dove, rapidly gaining speed while losing altitude. The lead jet, piloted by Oberfeldwebel Heinz Arnold, had reached barely 80 Manabakasis when Drew opened fire from 800 yards. Tracers streaked along the runway, striking the Me-262's right engine. The jet shuddered violently, but its forward speed prevented it from aborting. Struggling on one crippled engine, the Me-262 staggered into the air, unable to maintain altitude or accelerate. Drew closed to 400 yards and fired again, this time hitting the cockpit directly. Arnold's jet rolled inverted and plunged into the trees beside the runway, exploding on impact. The second Me-262, flown by Lieutenant Gard Cobbert, had witnessed Arnold's destruction and attempted to abort his takeoff. But the jet's poor throttle response and high landing speed made rapid deceleration impossible. Cobbert's aircraft was still rolling at high speed when Drew pulled out of his first attack and immediately repositioned for a second pass. McCandless called warnings about flak as German gunners found their range, 88 mm shells bursting around the attacking Mustangs in black puffs. Drew ignored the flak and dove again, firing a long burst into Cobbert's Me-262 as it attempted to turn off the runway. Hits sparkled along the fuselage on both engines. The jet slowed, then erupted in flames as fuel tanks ignited. Cobbert managed to escape the burning wreck, but his aircraft was a total loss. In less than 2 minutes, Drew had destroyed two of Germany's most advanced fighters, using tactics that would become standard doctrine for Allied pilots. The engagement demonstrated conclusively that technological superiority meant nothing during critical flight phases, and that aggression combined with precise timing could neutralize the Me-262 threat. Drew's gun camera jammed during the attack, providing no photographic evidence of his victories. His only witness, McCandless, was hit by flak during their escape from Acma and shot down, becoming a prisoner of war before he could corroborate Drew's claims. Without gun camera footage or witness statements, 8th Air Force Headquarters initially denied Drew's victory credits, a crushing disappointment after one of the war's most significant tactical achievements. Drew would not receive official recognition until 1983. Nearly 40 years later, when German Luftwaffe archives were cross-referenced with American records. Luftwaffe Ace Georg, Peter Ed, who had been scheduled to lead the Me-262 formation that day, but whose aircraft suffered mechanical problems, confirmed that he witnessed a yellow-nosed P-51 dive on the Me-262s and destroy both jets. Ed could not read the name Detroit Miss painted on the Mustang's nose from his position on the ground, but his testimony was sufficient. The United States Air Force awarded Drew the Air Force Cross on May 12, 1983. Presented by Secretary of the Air Force Vern Orr, Drew and his wife were flown from Johannesburg, South Africa, to the ceremony via C-141 Starlifter. He remains the first and only Allied pilot to shoot down 2 jet aircraft in a single mission while flying a propeller-driven fighter. That same October 7, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemper of the 479th Fighter Group may have scored another Me-262 victory, though uncertainty remains. Zemper, one of the 8th Air Force's most experienced fighter leaders, attacked what he believed was a Bf-109 during a mission over Germany. His gun camera footage was ambiguous, showing an aircraft that could have been either a Messerschmitt 109 or an Me-262. Post-war analysis suggested it was likely a jet, but the victory was never definitively confirmed. What mattered more than the specific victory claims was the emerging pattern. American fighter pilots were discovering that Me-262s, despite their revolutionary speed, could be defeated through tactical innovation. The key was refusing to engage jets in their element, high altitude, high-speed combat, and instead forcing engagements during vulnerable phases when speed advantage disappeared. Chuck Yeager encountered his first Me-262 exactly 1 month later, on November 6, 1944, while leading a bomber escort mission near Akma, Germany. Yeager's P-51, named Glamorous Glenn III after his wife Glennis, was cruising at patrol altitude when he spotted Me-262s attempting to intercept the bomber formation. The jets made their pass with typical tactics, diving through the bomber stream at tremendous speed, firing briefly, then using their velocity advantage to zoom, climb back to altitude before escort fighters could react. Yeager watched the jets disappear into clouds, apparently escaping clean. Standard doctrine said chasing Me-262s was futile, but Yeager made a calculated gamble. Those jets had to land somewhere, and they had to land soon because their fuel endurance was limited. He broke from the bomber formation and descended through the clouds, emerging at lower altitude near Akma airfield. Below him, Yeager spotted a lone Me-262 in the landing pattern, gear and flaps extended, speed reduced to perhaps 150-meter Mach as it lined up on final approach. The German pilot, focused on his landing, apparently failed to spot the Mustang diving on him from above and behind. Yeager pushed his throttle full forward and trimmed for maximum dive speed. The P-51 accelerated rapidly in the descent, using gravity to boost his speed above 450 medibars. He closed to 400 yards and opened fire, walking his tracers onto the Me-262's wings. Hits sparkled along the jet's left wing root and fuselage. The Me-262 pilot, probably wounded or killed by the initial burst, made no evasive maneuver. Yeager continued firing as he closed to point-blank range, pouring rounds into the jet's engines and cockpit. The Me-262's left wing folded upward, the jet rolled inverted, and plunged into the woods several hundred feet short of the runway threshold, exploding in a ball of orange flame. Yeager had no time to celebrate. Akma's defensive guns opened fire immediately, 88mm shells bursting around his Mustang as he screamed across the airfield at high speed and treetop altitude. His only option was to fly straight down the runway, using speed to escape before the flak crews could adjust their aim. Tracers arced across the field from both sides. Some rounds fired from one side of the runway actually hit gun positions on the opposite side in the chaos. Yeager held his P-51 low and fast, cleared the far end of the airfield, and pulled up hard, diving for the safety of a nearby valley. He had survived one of the most dangerous tactical situations in air combat, attacking an enemy airfield in daylight at low altitude. But he had also proven that Me-262s could be hunted and killed. Yeager later described the engagement with characteristic understatement. "First time I saw a jet, I shot it down. Not very sportsmanlike, but what the hell?" Through late 1944 and into 1945, American fighter pilots refined their anti-jet tactics based on hard-won experience and carefully analyzed gun camera footage. The P-51 Mustang proved ideal for the mission because of its exceptional range and endurance. A Mustang with full internal fuel and 2 wing drop tanks could remain airborne for more than 7 hours, giving pilots the ability to loiter near known jet bases for extended periods. When jets appeared, Mustang pilots used altitude advantage to dive on them, trading height for speed. In the dive, a P-51 could briefly approach or even exceed 500 mm, enough to catch Me-262s during their most exposed moments. Timing was critical. Attacking jets during their takeoff roll required spotting them early and positioning for attack before they reached flying speed. Catching them on landing approach required patience to wait for the perfect moment, when the jet was committed to its approach path with gear and flaps deployed. Fighter pilots developed an intimate knowledge of Me-262 operational patterns through persistent observation and intelligence analysis. They learned that jets typically operated in morning and late afternoon windows when visibility was good. But sun angles complicated visual acquisition for defenders. They noted that Me-262s often flew in pairs or small formations, rarely alone, meaning that destroying one jet frequently provided opportunities to attack others. They understood that German pilots, constrained by fuel limitations, could not wave off landing approaches and go around for another attempt. Once an Me-262 committed to landing with low fuel remaining, the pilot had no choice but to continue regardless of threats. This psychological factor gave attacking Mustang pilots a crucial advantage. The jet pilot knew he was exposed but could not abort, while the Mustang pilot could press his attack with confidence that his target would not suddenly accelerate and escape. The Luftwaffe's defensive measures grew, increasingly sophisticated in response to these tactics, but fundamental problems remained unsolvable. Flak alleys became denser, with some approach corridors defended by more than 100 guns of various calibers. Fighter cover increased, with FW-190D and TA-152H pilots ordered specifically to engage Allied fighters near jet bases, regardless of tactical situation. Me-262 pilots received instructions to vary their approach patterns, making random turns and altitude changes to complicate interception. Some bases deployed smoke generators to obscure the field during landing operations. Despite these efforts, the mathematical reality could not be changed. Me-262s needed specific bases with specific fuel supplies and could only remain airborne for limited durations. Allied fighters could saturate the areas around jet bases, making some engagements nearly inevitable. On February 25, 1945, Mustangs of the 55th Fighter Group executed one of the most devastating demonstrations of these tactics, surprising an entire staff of Me-262s at Geilenkirchen airfield during takeoff operations. The attack was perfectly timed, with P-51s arriving just as multiple jets began their takeoff rolls. In the chaos that followed, American pilots destroyed 6 Me-262s on the ground or during takeoff, with several more damaged. These losses represented a significant portion of the operational jets available to that unit. German records indicate the Me-262s belonged to the ill-fated KGKA-54, a bomber unit that had been re-equipped with jets but whose pilots lacked adequate fighter training. The 55th Fighter Group's attack demonstrated that concentrated fighter sweeps against jet bases during known operational periods could achieve dramatic results, though at considerable risk. Several Mustangs were damaged by defensive fire during the engagement, and the tactical success depended entirely on achieving complete surprise. The psychological impact of these defeats on German jet pilots was profound and cumulative. Me-262 pilots were elite aviators, carefully selected and extensively trained, often veterans with considerable combat experience. They initially approached missions with confidence in their technological advantage. However, repeated losses during takeoff and landing phases created an atmosphere of dread surrounding these critical moments. Pilots knew that every departure and return carried significant risk of ambush. The knowledge that Allied fighters might be waiting, combined with limited fuel and the inability to abort once committed to landing, created intense psychological pressure that affected performance and decision-making. The March 18, 1945 raid on Berlin illustrated both the Me-262's potential and its ultimate inability to change the war's outcome. A total of 1,021 Allied bombers, escorted by 632 fighters, attacked the German capital in what would be the last major air battle over Germany. Luftwaffe commanders assembled 37 Me-262s from JG-7 for a coordinated attack on the bomber formations, the largest jet force yet committed to a single mission. Oberleutnant Guy Wegmann led his squadron in a loose formation toward the incoming bombers, firing R-4M unguided rockets for the first time in operational use. Each 50mm rocket, carried in underwing racks of 12 per aircraft, was designed to detonate near bombers, destroying them with blast and fragmentation without requiring precise aim. Wegmann's rockets struck a formation of B-17s, and observers reported multiple bombers hit and falling. Other Me-262 pilots pressed attacks with conventional 30mm cannon, using their speed to make multiple passes before the escorts could react effectively. The engagement was brief but intense. German pilots claimed 12 bombers and 1 fighter shot down, though US records indicate 8 heavy bombers were actually lost. along with 3 Me-262s destroyed in air combat. The discrepancy between claims and actual losses illustrated the common wartime pattern of overclaiming due to combat confusion. Even accepting German claims at face value, the jets destroyed less than 1% of the attacking force, while the massive bomber formation reached its target and delivered its ordnance. 5 American fighter pilots failed to return, and dozens of bomber crew members were killed or captured. Still, the mission was considered a complete success by Allied planners. In February 1945, Adolf Galland, Germany's former general of fighters, dismissed after disputes with Hermann Göring over fighter strategy, formed JG-44, Jagdverband 44, as an elite Me-262 unit composed of Germany's most experienced aces. The roster of Jagdverband 44 read like a who's who of Luftwaffe legends, featuring pilots with hundreds of combined victories. The unit was given priority for aircraft, fuel, and support, representing Germany's final attempt to field jet fighters in meaningful numbers under optimal conditions. Galland himself flew combat missions, scoring victories with both cannon and R-4M rockets. Other pilots reported successes against bombers, and, when conditions favored jet tactics, even against escorting fighters. Yet Jagdverband 44's operational life was measured in weeks, not months. Allied bombing forced constant relocation, fuel shortages grounded aircraft for days, and engine reliability problems meant that half the assigned jets were typically unserviceable, awaiting spare parts or replacements. The gap between theoretical capability and practical effectiveness became painfully clear. German records indicate that approximately 1,143 Me-262s were manufactured during the war. Of these, only around 200 to 300 ever saw combat. The remainder were destroyed on the ground by bombing, lost during training, or rendered unserviceable by maintenance problems. At no point did the Luftwaffe have more than 50 Me-262s operationally ready simultaneously, with daily availability closer to 25 aircraft. This small force faced Allied fighter strength exceeding 5,000 aircraft at any given time, plus thousands of bombers. The mathematics were insurmountable. Me-262 pilots claimed approximately 542 Allied aircraft destroyed in air-to-air combat, though post-war analysis shows the usual wartime overclaiming. Allied forces destroyed Me-262s at rates exceeding German production and training capabilities. U.S. records credit P-51 Mustangs with 92.5 confirmed jet shootdowns, including aircraft destroyed on the ground and during takeoff or landing. The 357th Fighter Group, Chuck Yeager's unit, led American forces with 18.5 confirmed jet kills. The 55th Fighter Group claimed 17, while the 78th and 339th Fighter Groups each claimed 15. British forces, flying Hawker Tempests and Spitfires, claimed an additional dozen. The cumulative effect was that Me-262 losses exceeded replacements, and the operational force steadily declined despite production continuing until Germany's surrender. German ace pilots offered mixed assessments of the aircraft's effectiveness in post-war interviews. Georg Peter Ida, who scored 12 kills in the jet, acknowledged that its speed made high-altitude bomber interceptions relatively safe, but noted that Allied countermeasures increasingly negated this advantage. Walter Dahl, credited with 11 jet victories including 6 Mustangs, emphasized that fuel limitations and engine reliability severely restricted tactical options, rendering the jet's theoretical superiority largely irrelevant. Heinrich Bahr, with 16 Me-262 kills out of 240 career victories, stated flatly that the aircraft arrived too late and in too few numbers to matter. Franz Schall, likely the type's top ace with 17 kills, including 6 4-engine bombers and 10 P-51s, was killed in action in April 1945. But his earlier reports highlighted the jet's inability to engage maneuvering fighters, effectively due to its high approach speeds and wide turning radius. Then as tactical lessons learned from Me-262. Operations influenced post-war jet fighter development worldwide. Allied engineers studied captured jets intensively at facilities in the United States and Britain, confirming that the basic design was sound, but that engine technology remained the critical limiting factor. Early American jets, like the Lockheed P-80 and Republic F-84, along with Soviet designs such as the MiG-15, incorporated solutions to many of the problems identified in the Me-262. Longer engine life, better throttle response, improved fuel efficiency, and stronger airframes addressed the specific vulnerabilities that Allied fighters had, exploited American pilots who successfully engaged. Me-262s became recognized experts within the fighter community. Their combat reports were studied carefully by intelligence officers and training instructors. Beyond Urban Drew and Chuck Yeager, dozens of other pilots scored jet kills through the persistent application of tactics honed by hard experience. These pilots shared common traits: exceptional eyesight, precise gunnery skills, aggressive temperaments, and a willingness to accept risks that more cautious aviators avoided. Attacking jet bases through dense flak required courage bordering on recklessness, yet they repeatedly flew such missions, understanding the strategic importance of neutralizing the jet threat. The human cost was severe on both sides. American fighter pilots killed during attacks on jet bases often died far from home, crashing in fiery explosions with remains sometimes never recovered. German Me-262 pilots, the elite of the Luftwaffe, were irreplaceable, lost at rates that Germany's shrinking training programs could not sustain. Each lost or captured jet pilot represented hundreds of hours of training, millions of Reich marks in investment, and years of combat experience. Stress contributed to errors, accidents during takeoff and landing, and declining combat effectiveness even among experienced aviators. The infrastructure supporting Me-262 operations progressively collapsed through early 1945 as Allied armies advanced into Germany and strategic bombing intensified. Specialized jet fuel became increasingly scarce as refineries were bombed or captured. Replacement engines, already in short supply, became unavailable when factories were destroyed or overrun. Spare parts for airframes and systems vanished from supply chains, and trained maintenance personnel were killed in raids or reassigned to infantry units. Airfields themselves came under direct attack as front lines moved eastward. By April 1945, Me-262 units operated from sections of autobarns or improvised strips, hiding aircraft in woods and working with minimal supplies under constant threat of air attack. The final weeks of operations were characterized by sporadic sorties flown by scattered units as Central Command disintegrated. Individual pilots flew missions when fuel was available, often attacking targets of opportunity rather than executing coordinated operations. Some chose to fly their jets to Allied-held territory to surrender, while others flew final missions knowing return was impossible due to fuel shortages or airfield capture. A few, including members of Jagdverband 44, flew combat until the literal last days of the war, achieving kills even as Germany's military structure collapsed. Completely post-war analysis by American and British aviation experts concluded that the Me-262 represented a revolutionary, technological achievement that arrived too late to affect the war's outcome. Even if Hitler had not delayed production with bomber variants, even if engine reliability had been better, and even if more jets were produced, the strategic situation in 1944 limited its impact. Germany lacked fuel, trained pilots, air superiority, and faced overwhelming numerical disadvantages against Allied air forces. The Me-262 could not solve these problems regardless of its performance advantages. The legacy of the Me-262 versus Mustang engagements extended far beyond World War II, influencing air combat doctrine for generations. The fundamental principle that technological superiority does not guarantee tactical success became a key case study in military academies worldwide. The importance of exploiting enemy weaknesses rather than confronting their strengths became a central lesson in fighter pilot training. Recognition that even revolutionary weapons have exploitable vulnerabilities influenced military planning and procurement throughout the Cold War and beyond. The specific tactics American pilots developed to counter the Me-262's speed advantage, using altitude to gain velocity in dives, timing attacks during vulnerable flight phases, and persistently patrolling known enemy operating areas, remained relevant as new generations of high-performance fighters emerged. First-hand accounts from pilots provide vivid insight into the psychological and tactical challenges of these engagements. Chuck Yeager, in his autobiography and interviews, emphasized that destroying an Me-262 required accepting exceptional risk and making split-second decisions with incomplete information. He described the tension of loitering near German airfields, knowing flak and enemy fighters would respond instantly, the careful timing needed to maximize dive speed at the critical moment, and the satisfaction of proving that American fighters could overcome the seemingly invincible jets. Urban Drew, after receiving his belated recognition in 1983, spoke of the frustration of having his victories denied for nearly 40 years due to lack of corroborating evidence. But he also stressed the mission's importance over personal recognition. Engineering lessons from Me-262 operations directly influenced the P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter, which entered service as World War II ended. Lockheed engineers extensively studied captured Me-262s, examining engines, airframes, and systems to understand both their successes and failures. The P-80 incorporated longer-lasting engines with improved throttle response, addressing the Me-262's most critical weakness. Enhanced fuel efficiency extended range beyond the Me-262's 650-mile maximum. Stronger landing gear reduced accident rates, and better cockpit visibility improved situational awareness during vulnerable takeoff and landing phases. Soviet designers similarly studied Me-262 technology, shipping captured aircraft and engines to research facilities for testing. These insights influenced designs such as the MiG-15 and Yak-15, with Soviet engineers also integrating British engine technology obtained through espionage and technology transfer. The global dissemination of jet fighter knowledge accelerated the transition from piston to jet propulsion, which dominated the late 1940s and 1950s. Within a decade of World War II's end, propeller-driven fighters were largely obsolete, replaced by jets in virtually every air force worldwide. The final assessment of Me-262 operations reveals an aircraft capable of tactical successes, but ultimately a strategic failure. Individual pilots achieved notable kill totals, and specific missions highlighted the jet's capabilities under favorable conditions. Yet the cumulative impact on Allied operations was minimal. Strategic bombing continued without hindrance. Allied fighters maintained air superiority, and ground forces advanced into Germany with effective air support. Resources devoted to Me-262 development, including scarce materials, manufacturing capacity, and skilled labor, might have been more effectively used producing conventional fighters that could operate efficiently with available fuel and trained pilots. The story of German pilots flaunting their jets until Mustang aces exploited their vulnerabilities ultimately illustrates the limits of technology in solving strategic problems. Germany developed the world's first operational jet fighter, achieving a breakthrough that offered tactical advantages. Yet these accomplishments could not overcome fundamental disadvantages in numbers, resources, fuel, trained personnel, and overall strategic position. American and Allied pilots, flying less advanced aircraft but supported by overwhelming industrial capacity, comprehensive training, reliable logistics, and sound tactical doctrine, defeated the technological marvel through persistence, innovation, and professional excellence. In the final analysis, the Me-262 remains one of aviation history's most compelling what-ifs. It was an aircraft that hinted at the future of flight, but arrived too late to alter the course of the past. Its combat record, while impressive, in select engagements, was ultimately insufficient to change the war's outcome. The American pilots who developed and executed tactics to counter the jet threat earned their place in aviation history, not through technological superiority, but through tactical skill, courage, and an unwavering refusal to concede advantage to an apparently invincible opponent. Their success proved that human factors, training, doctrine, leadership, and determination can overcome technological disadvantages when properly applied. The transformation from German confidence to Allied dominance in the jet versus Mustang encounters occurred in less than a year, from October 1944, when the first Me-262 was shot down, to May 1945, when the last jet operations ceased. This rapid shift resulted not from a single factor, but from the cumulative effect of systematically exploiting Me-262 vulnerabilities, combined with relentless pressure that prevented the Luftwaffe from ever achieving sustainable jet operations. Every Me-262 destroyed during takeoff or landing was one less available to intercept bombers. Every pilot killed or captured represented irreplaceable experience and training. Every successful Allied attack on jet bases forced German operations to become more dispersed and less coordinated. The final months of Me-262 operations saw German pilots fighting with increasing desperation. Fuel shortages limited sorties to only the most critical missions. Engine failures grounded aircraft for extended periods. Allied fighter patrols made every takeoff and landing potentially lethal. Constant base relocations disrupted both operations and morale. Yet some pilots continued flying combat missions until the very end of the war, demonstrating remarkable courage and professionalism despite impossible odds. They knew victory was unattainable, but flew nonetheless, driven by duty, honor, and the hope that their sacrifices might still matter. The story concluded not with a single dramatic battle, but through gradual dissolution, as Germany's military infrastructure collapsed in early May 1945. Me-262s were abandoned on airfields, hidden in woods to prevent capture, or destroyed by their own crews to deny them to advancing forces. A few were flown to Allied territory and surrendered, but most simply stopped flying as fuel ran out and maintenance became impossible. The jets that had promised to dominate Allied bombers ended their operational lives scattered across Germany, silent, testaments to the gap between technological potential and operational reality. Meanwhile, the Mustang pilots who had hunted them returned home as the war ended. Their mission accomplished, the jet threat neutralized through tactics that proved superior to technology.